Hello, everyone. My name is Mr. Harding. As you know from the role play, you can call me Ty. I'm going to speak specifically about diversity and oppression and how it applied to our specific role play. Issues with diversity are, leadership, cultural competence, resistance, and censorship. When you take a look at Mr. Harding's role, being an African American male in corporate America, currently African Americans make up 13% of the total population. However, Black professionals held just 3.2% of all executive or senior leadership roles, and only 0.8% of those leadership roles as a CEO within a Fortune 500 company. That type of stress translates into home, and you can see the impact that being in that type of position can have on the overall family unit. Cultural competence, right? When we look at the interaction between Mr. Stevie and Lainey, I think it was safe to say Mr. Stevie might have lacked some cultural competence. Lainey stated that she was having issues with folks, teasing her because she's biracial, translating her behavior into acting out. And his reaction was a complete, that was a display of a lack of cultural competence, because as we went through the role play, you saw how the communication effectively managed that relationship and brought understanding that might not have been there. There's also resistance when it comes to diversity, delaying implementation of diversity programs, attacking diversity, as it's, because it's too consuming or too complex, or, sometimes people just don't care. And then that leads into the censorship, people not feeling comfortable be able to talk about issues that have to do with diversity and oppression and how it affects their lives. I think we saw that in the case with Lainey, because what did she do? She did a lot of shutting down. Next slide. Specifically with oppression, main issues with oppression are, of course, funding, money, education, opportunity, and attention. There's a lack of funding in schools. Lainey attends a school that is in the inner city. There's a lot of diversity within the school unit. However, with her being biracial, it gives people an opportunity to pick on her. The education inequities, right? They impede the access to quality learning environments for so many students, particularly students of color and in the LGBT community. There's an overwhelming biased remarks and experience of harassment and assault in school based on individual sexual orientation and their gender expression. With a lack of education comes a lack of opportunities. Those who get an education have higher incomes, have more opportunities in their lives, and tend to be healthier. Society also benefits from that as well. And then the attention, anti-oppression is the strategies, theories, actions, and practices that actively challenge systems of oppression and ongoing basis in one's daily life. And if we don't learn from our past, from every perspective, and work to make things better, we will continue to be victims of that past. That's what I have.
All right, great. So I will just be covering the conflict resolution techniques that we used in our role play. We use nonviolent communication and common ground. And nonviolent communication is based on four components in two parts. And according to Marshall Rosenberg's model, when you put all of these together, you're able to communicate your needs and also hear the other person's needs and focus on what's happening in the here and now. So the first component of nonviolent communication is observation with evaluation. And this just means that you're listening to the other person while they're speaking without making any judgments about what they're saying. So you're not trying to come up with an argument or thinking anything other than just observing the information that they're giving to you. Next is feelings versus thoughts. When we express ourselves to the other person, it's important that we express our feelings by things such as happiness, like I feel happy when this happens, or I feel frustrated when this happens, rather than thoughts such as, when you do this, I think that you mean such and such. The next is the importance of expressing and understanding needs, both the other person's and ours. Once we can understand our needs and then also express them to someone else, we can feel the comfortable feelings that we're striving for, such as happiness or peacefulness. And then it's also really important that we request concrete actions. We need to let the other person know what actions they can take to meet our needs. And to really make this technique effective, we have to have true empathy. So we really need to put ourselves in someone else's place so that we can sense what they're feeling, and see when their needs are met or unmet. And being honest with ourselves and others allows us to express our needs and to be open to other people's needs. Next slide, please. And then the common ground technique. In order to use this technique, each side really just needs to listen while the other one speaks. And then that side that's listening needs to recap what they heard. And then that side will recap what they heard until both sides are in agreement of what was said, rather than what they think they meant or what they heard. They'll simply say what was said. And the purpose of this technique is really to listen. So we're not necessarily expecting a resolution or solution within this exercise. We're just really paving the way for that in the future.
Thank you, Ms. Rosie. And so I'll be speaking about how the techniques that were in the session that we role played were used, and specifically the NVC and the common ground. So the idea that we're putting forth is that the teacher, Mr. Stevie, Mr. Stevie and Lainey were having issues in school. And the issues that they were having was a misunderstanding, to put it simply, in that Lainey was dealing with multiple issues at home. Her parents are having issues, to say the least. Her father is having a stressful time at work, and her mother is also having stress trying to have an upkeep with the house and basically keeping her family together. Mr. Stevie's needs and what he had perceived to be a negative output of emotion from Lainey directed at him was she was not participating in class and was essentially what he thinks is not living up to her potential. And so when the counseling session first starts, everybody's reaction is mostly defensive and hostile to each other. Mr. Stevie is a more reserved character. I mean, it's kind of after myself, I guess, is I'm more reserved when I'm speaking. So therefore, he is more reserved in that he isn't explicitly expressing the jackal language and some of the outright outbursts that maybe Lainey did when she said, "Shut up, I hate you." But he was doing that in the sense that he was not attuned to what was going on with Lainey. His expression of needs was at the expense of Lainey, saying that you're not doing well in class and it's because of X, Y, and Z. And he was not listening or searching for the signs that might have been the source of why she wasn't doing well. That was also shown by Ty and Rosie's relationship, in which the first thing that they focused on was how the drinking was affecting Rosie, why the justification for why he was drinking, and there wasn't any listening. But it was necessary to have the conversation go forward. And by the end of the role play, Mr. Stevie starts to realize that Lainey does in fact have a lot of factors at work in her life, and he starts to formulate much of his lesson plan and some of his approach around the knowledge that he's been given about this. So instead of insisting that she has to take an interest or needs to participate, he now tries to formulate a plan that will get her involved based on her interest, based on an organic, curiosity in what Mr. Steve is putting on, I guess a PowerPoint slide in class. And that will contribute to Lainey having success in school, which would take pressure off of the family, knowing that she isn't doing, poorly or not having a great deal of motivation to be there, that she is in fact doing something she does like. And Mr. Stevie can be a part of that in trying to check in with her during class or after class or I guess, in between classes of what we said in the script, and also keeping track of how she's doing at home as well. And with Ty and Miss Rosie, after the defensive language comes out, they essentially start to realize that they haven't been attuned to each other. They haven't talked about any of these things. They need to find the common ground where it's a safe circle that they can express what they're feeling and not have it be, not be in a vulnerable state without being vulnerable to each other. And that is essentially, they start the dialogue by the end of the role play. And if it goes on that way, they will have a healthy relationship by the end if they keep going to counseling. And that's all I have.
Hi, my name is Audra Rivers, and I portrayed Miss Audra Rivers as a therapist during our chosen scenario. There were 5 stages that I selected that were part of the group, and I'm going to give you the 5 stages. The first stage was the initiation stage, which was presented during the beginning of the session. This was presented when the social worker introduced herself and developed a unique icebreaker for the group to decrease possible anxiety and tension. The second stage is the struggle chaos stage. This stage was presented when each group member began to use verbally abusive language and to deflect blame. This is when the group members were yelling, telling each other to shut up, I didn't raise you like that. And the social worker introduced nonverbal communication. All right, the third stage is the resolution stage. This stage is developed when the social worker introduces nonviolent communication and encourages each group member to display mutual respect to one another. The fourth stage is the working stage. This stage is introduced when the group member begins to utilize techniques introduced by a social worker for more effective communication. So this stage is when everyone was able to come to a resolution and they was able to actually peacefully explain their internal emotions and figure out how they were going to fix the problem. The final stage is the termination stage. This stage is presented when the social worker asks each group member if they would like to express additional concerns before concluding the meeting. This is a stage that most people skip over, but is also just as important as the first stage because this stage kind of gives each group member closure. And that will conclude the end of my presentation.